All right, Zach, thanks for meeting with me again. It's always a pleasure to sit down and talk with you about all things sales development and all things happening at ZoomInfo. I really appreciate the relationship and the willingness to come on here and give us some insight from your experience. The first question I want to hit you with is, I think, a relatively heavy one. You've been in the data information space for what, pushing 5 years, over 5 years, and I know you from when you were at Discover.org, and you've made your way up and through into ZoomInfo, and you've had a progressive career where you've climbed the ranks in many ways. But what I want to understand is what you're seeing from a data information like market evolution standpoint. You've been in that area, hyper focused with the best of the best for 5 years. A lot of companies, a lot of people are jumping and moving industries here or there, and you've stuck in where in an important field, I should say. So what are you seeing from an evolution standpoint? How are things changing? What should we expect?
Yeah, it's a great question, and yeah, thanks for having me again. Always great to spend some time with you and talk shop. Yeah, so I've been in the data and information services space now just a hair over 5 years, and data is sort of that natural resource, kind of like crude oil, right? That every company is operating based on data. Every go-to-market team in the world is operating on data, and some of them are operating on good data, some of them are operating on bad data, but whether you like it or not, you're
Right.
operating on data. Even your
Right.
Rolodex from way back when of people that you play golf with, that's data. And that piece hasn't changed. Like the importance and the just the critical element that data is to a go-to-market operating system, that hasn't changed, and we don't expect that to change. Like there's got to be something that's fueling that. What has changed is the granularity of data that go-to-market teams are using.
Mhm.
What's changed is the way that companies are thinking about go-to-market through a data lens, right? It's not just this is information for salespeople to know who to call and how to get a hold of those people.
Right.
It's not just information for marketers to know how to build segments and audiences for campaigns and digital activation and things like that. It's ICP modeling, it's total addressable market modeling, it's understanding customer behavior, understanding things like intent, and so many more of these things that used to be really sophisticated and only for the biggest and most well-resourced go-to-market organizations out there. These things are now becoming table stakes even for much smaller companies, much smaller go-to-market organizations. And so it's a higher level of granularity. It's more data and different types of data that are being used. We think of things like when firmographic data first became a big thing, and companies were using that to really understand their addressable market, and then technographics, right? Who can we actually sell to? Who has the right stack? And that was kind of an evolution from the previous model, which was channel sales and partnerships, right? Where hardware vendors had their partners on the software and integration side, and that's sort of how you did business. But now we got these
Interoperable
coming in.
integrations and finding those where those synergistic opportunities are.
100%. And then now we have technographic data, and now these software companies can come in and say, we actually don't really need the partnership. It's great to have, and we'll still build that, but we actually don't need that to go directly to our market. We have the technographics. We understand who has the technologies that are required to be a fit for us.
And then using that for competitive displacement as well. If you are selling technology, where are my competitors, especially the weak ones that I know I can pick on and displace relatively easily.
Yeah, who just picked that technology up or who just dropped it?
Right.
Those are big things. So yeah, there's a lot of evolution happening around the types of data, and with so many people moving around too, like the contact information piece is still a cornerstone for every sales organization, just knowing how to get in touch with people.
Right.
What's interesting now, though, is there's more and more as time goes on, and I know we're going to get into some AI stuff later, so I won't get too far ahead here. But
that's okay.
What's interesting is there's much more of a competition for attention now. It used to be, how do I get in front of somebody? And the assumption was, if I get in front of Derek and I can sell to Derek, I got my shot. I can pitch. Now it's like, okay, I'm pretty confident I can get to Derek. I know where he is. I know what his phone number is. I know what his email is. I can serve ads to him. But how am I actually going to capture his attention? And how am I going to hold his attention for more than a few seconds.
Right,
So the
right.
messaging, the strategy behind sort of top to bottom, how are we getting in front of our buyers, and what are we saying to them, and when
Like
are
how
we
to
saying
deploy the
it?
data. It's like great you have it getting you pointing in the right direction, but how do you execute upon it?
Exactly. And so, the data again has just kind of become table stakes in a lot of cases. And
Yeah.
now it's like, okay, how do I use that data to be competitive? That's where a lot of that evolution is happening.
Well, us talk more about that. I mean, you queued it up perfectly. You talked about the AI part of it. I do want to understand what ZoomInfo is doing from an AI perspective. It's good to see that the little guys basically can now start operating like the big guys. I like that you talked about this idea that it used to really just be large organizations that had access to this, and I think what we're talking about in that is the concept of big data and business intelligence organizations that you normally would only find in larger companies, maybe late stage, mid-sized companies as well, that have a BI team that can ingest the disparate data into a data lake and then put that into something like a Tableau or some other, Power BI tool to visualize this stuff and really time the market and operationalize the data in all kinds of different ways that they might have to. But from a sales context and marketing standpoint, it's really identifying high propensity opportunities that that you can execute on. But then it sounds like you're taking it the next mile with ingesting some strategy and some execution there. I think I read a quote from Henry Schuck recently. When this integration is complete, our customers will be able to use ChatGPT to shorten cold emails, isolate a call to action from a sales call, and much more. So I think he said the integration is designed to empower users to tell the platform what they're looking for and to resurface the most relevant insights for their needs. So with you guys being the data company, let's be honest, in the market where you compete, seems like a really big change.
Yeah, for sure. So we're talking about the Chat GPT integration that we have sort of announced, and there's a lot being built out there still, and with all of the data that companies have, and we just talked about this, right? How you deploy that data is so critical. And what the ChatGPT integration is going to do, one of the things it's going to do, among many things, is really help those companies that, whether they have an army of data scientists who can operate on large amounts of data and make meaningful recommendations to go-to-market teams. It's going to allow the companies that don't have
Right.
that to really level up and to be a lot more sophisticated, and to sort of play to be a much larger size force than they think they are today with the resources that they have. And that's everything from, salespeople being able to use ChatGPT and search functionality within the platform to understand what to look for in the first place,
Mm.
to marketing teams being able to really zero in on, as you said, the highest propensity opportunities, the highest intent, highest behavior score, what have you, and really cut down on a lot of the noise. Because as more data comes in and as we get more and more granular with that data, one of the things that can happen and that we see happening is the teams get really overwhelmed. And then you have this sort of paradox of, well, we have all the data we want, but we're not actually getting anything from it. We're not really doing anything with it because it's overwhelming and there's just too much to look at. And so
Right.
prioritization is a place where that artificial intelligence is going to help sellers and help marketers and help go-to-market teams as a whole really understand, like, where do I get the biggest bang for my buck right now? What should I focus on and what should I not focus on? What should I just not spend any time on at all, or just put on the back burner for a while? And that type of insight, that type of recommendation really only used to come if, like I said, you had that army of data scientists and engineers and machine learning models and all of this infrastructure and all of this human capital on the
Right.
back end. It's really expensive, really resource intensive, and you get some of these insights. And now what we're seeing is that's going to be a lot more accessible to a lot more of the market. And it's going to take those companies that have smaller sales teams, smaller go-to-market orgs, and it's going to make them a lot more efficient and a lot more powerful without going and investing tremendous amounts of capital building out data science teams, building out business intelligence teams, and
Which you have
that,
a ton of, I would imagine. I mean, you guys have all the best in the world probably at your disposal, but I
yeah.
mean, now that that is being available to, I mean, aren't you a little worried that the smaller guys that are in your place are going to be able to use that to attack you as well? I mean, you are one of those big companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought for sure. I don't I'm not worried about it overall in terms of how it will affect our ability to compete in the markets that we're in, because these things are only as good as the data that fuels them.
Sure.
And I think there's still always going to be somewhat of a competitive advantage for companies that are innovative and are constantly thinking about how to find those marginal efficiency gains and how they're going to market and understanding where to prioritize and spend their time. If we weren't drinking our own Kool-Aid here, if we were
Mhm.
not behaving in that way, that
Right.
certainly it would be a concern. Like, hey, we're going to sell this thing that makes people more efficient and shows them where to prioritize, and we're not doing the same.
But you're
But
doing it too, so you're accelerating at even faster rate as well, it sounds like.
totally, yeah,
Yeah. Wow. Well, it sounds like it's a path to efficient growth, which is the real concept. I know we talk a lot and you hear everyone saying more with less. It seems like it's just everywhere, but efficient growth. And this is a path to that using, but is it available now at ZoomInfo? Is that functionality something that existing ZoomInfo customer could tap into today, or is there a roadmap here?
yeah, not available today, and I don't have a specific timeline here. I can promise that will be live, but there's information out there. Henry Schuck, our CEO, released a video and kind of a teaser of what that's going to look like. So I would encourage anyone that's interested to take a look at that. It's not something that's live today, but we're all really excited about it.
Right.
And we have always used a lot of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Even going back to the Discover org days, we used to describe our data collection and cleansing and keeping up to date
The
processes
market
as
ready
human
data.
in the loop
Yeah.
artificial intelligence. So we were kind of combining the best of the research team, the data science team, with the artificial intelligence that kind of allowed us to scale. And so that concept is not new to us as a company at all. It's been integral to who we are and how we've operated, at least in the 5+ years that I've been with the company. So yeah, this is sort of the next iteration of how we live that out and what that looks like.
Well, I'm excited to see what you guys put together and what that looks like. You have obviously a large install base, and a lot of my customers use ZoomInfo, so I'm sure they'll all be excited to tap into that new functionality once it's available.
Absolutely.
I mentioned earlier at the start that you've been in this space for quite some time. You've had a progressive career. You don't stick around at ZoomInfo and companies like this for as long as you have and progress through the roles that you've held. You guys can go look at his LinkedIn profile, but he's moved up a few times. And these things only happen when people are doing something right. So what do you attribute that progressive career to? What can you share with someone who's maybe on a similar path but a little behind you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of really, really incredible people, and that's just a testament to how ZoomInfo operates and how much it values bringing on the best and the brightest and exposing its talent to other really talented people and the talent development priority here and so many other things. But if I had to sort of give some guidance to those who are on similar growth trajectories, one of the things that I really leaned into, that I attribute a lot of this accelerated growth to, is this unquenchable curiosity and asking tons of questions and just being unapologetic and shameless and ruthless when it comes to building relationships and learning different personas and different departments within the company, and understanding how we operate and what matters to certain people, what drives them, what they're measured on. And that's, a lot of people talk about going and listening to calls from top sales performers, right? Or taking the top, performers out to lunch and picking their brains. There's tons of value in that. Not
Right.
saying that that's not something you should do,
Yeah, it's
but if
important
that's
knowledge
where it
transfer.
ends, you're missing out on a lot. So like, take that same approach to every department in the company, even if it's a department or a group of people that you think has nothing to do with go to market. Go learn it anyway. Like
Mm,
it will benefit you at some point down the line. If for no other reason, then you will have relationships there. And there's the old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
right, right,
Um, Obviously the data space as a whole is kind of against that idea of it's not what you know, it's who you know. It is absolutely about what you know, but we're still companies made up of people, and so the relationships matter there, and opportunity exists in building those relationships and just having familiarity with who you are, especially as your organization grows. I mean, when I joined, there were maybe 400 to 500 employees at Discover.org, and
wow,
maybe 30 to 40 SDRs. So, and to me at the time, that was a big company, which is funny to think about now because we're 10 times that size. Um, and but building those relationships early on, and just that curiosity and that drive to really understand people and their roles, and what they're measured on, and how that impacts how they make decisions. Uh, that all informed a lot about how I sold to people, and how I coached my teams to sell to those personas. Um, and a lot of the opportunities that I've been afforded in my career here have come from familiarity with different people, and from relationships that I've built. And not saying that it was me versus somebody else because of who I knew,
right.
but as the company is growing and there's more and more new faces around, when there's that familiarity, like people are going to make decisions based off of that. They're going to think of you. So there is very real tangible value in people knowing who you are, demonstrating your work ethic, and being pleasant and easy to work with.
Right, right,
And that doesn't, by the way, just mean you're a pushover and that you say yes to everything. Um, Counterintuitively, actually, I think it's a lot about knowing where to say yes and where to say no.
right,
And back
right.
to my point about prioritization and go to market orgs, that applies in this piece as well. Just knowing where you can make the most impact, knowing what you're good at and where you are bringing the most value, and knowing where you need to partner with other departments, other people, where you're not the best person at that thing. The quicker you can get to that point, the easier and the more pleasant you are to work with, and the more perceived value you're bringing to the table. Because when they think of Zack Thompson, they're not just thinking of Zack Thompson, they're thinking of Zack Thompson and the network of people that Zack Thompson knows and can bring to the table
Right.
to solve whatever problems we need to solve, or to unlock whatever opportunity we're trying to unlock.
Wow. Wow. That is multifaceted in so many ways. I'm listening to you talk and I'm firing on all kinds of different angles to this. I think about the employee that you've helped influence their career because of those relationships that you established, where you've been able to help bridge those promotions or campaign for someone's growth within the organization, because you had those relationships, right? So that's, if I'm going to work for Zack Thompson, that's what's in it for me from that perspective. I imagine there's a break fix component, like you were kind of talking about, even if it's in another department like IT that has nothing to do with go to market, directly, but being able to go to business intelligence, even for as an example, and be able to access those special requests so that you can solve complicated problems for your team and accelerate their trajectory, if you will. So there's that break fix through those relationships. And then you had mentioned it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I'll add to that. I say this a lot. It's not what you know. It's not also, who you know, but who knows what you do. And
Mhm.
so when you think about people coming to you to help solve a problem, right? And you mentioned to me offline that often other organizations, other departments, whether it's go to market or not, will reach out to you because a client is facing a particular issue that maybe doesn't directly tie into ZoomInfo as like a customer success issue, but more of like strategy around deploying sales development and improving sales development strategies and these sorts of things. They'll come to you as a sort of a consulting complex. So that is another thing about these networks. But the thing that really I think stands out is as we progress in our careers, that's the thing that makes or breaks us in our trajectory. I've found firsthand, both in a positive and in a negative way, where I've struggled in times to create cross-functional relationships and get that alignment that you're talking about. Truly, we're working well together, but for whatever reason, it's not gelling 100%. And so that makes it difficult for you to progress to that next step. So when you get into a director role, a senior management role, it is really all about that ability to create cross-functional alignment, because when it does click, where I've seen it work well, and you have that everything flows. And that's the competitive advantage that an organization or a team can really have, is that level of alignment that you have within the business. So, you're not just talking about your own advancement in this, you're talking about how the business succeeds based on that as well, right?
Most definitely. Yeah, like we're a team, we're a unit, and everyone plays a critical role. And if everyone on the team is the best in the business at that role, you've got the
Right.
best possible team. Like if I'm the best at what I do, but I'm on a team and there's other people on the team that are not the best at what they do, we don't have the best team there. We might be able to compete for sure, but that's very much our philosophy, is let's bring in and let's develop our people to be the absolute best at what they do and to play those roles. And everyone sort of has a stake in everything that's going on. It's not just like, okay, Zach's a stakeholder for sales development and nobody else cares about sales development. Marketing cares about sales development, and sales development cares about marketing, and we're working together on these things. So we all have sort of that ownership stake and some skin in the game there. And so learning to manage up, learning to manage out, those are really, really valuable skills. A lot of newer managers that I talk to and who I work with, they're so focused on managing down and
Right.
being amazing at coaching and developing their reps, right? And
Which is important. It's important, but
that's the
yes,
job.
it's
That's
a part of it. Yeah.
for sure. But when you start to think about, your trajectory and your growth, being able to manage up and manage out, that's what that's what senior leaders are looking for in you, to demonstrate that you are ready to move into a senior leadership position, to take on multiple teams at the same time, to start being responsible for not just individual contributors, but other leaders, and your ability to solve increasingly complex problems, right? Um, you have to be able to manage out. The expectation isn't, oh, Zach's going to go solve that because Zach's Einstein smart and knows everything. It's not that at all. In fact, most of the time, like, I'm the dumbest guy in the room. But what I know is
Well, then you're in the
where
right
I
room.
bring
That's how you know
value.
you're in the right room, right?
100%.
Yeah.
And I know I have partnerships and relationships with people who are really good at the things that I'm not good at. And so that opens up this whole new world of what's possible. And there's a confidence that comes with that, that's
Mm.
like, we have this big challenging problem in front of us and there's not a lot of direction on how to solve it, and it's kind of uncharted territory, but it's not intimidating anymore when you have that.
The best brains in the business around you, putting their egos aside and really working in the same, rowing in the same direction, as they say, to solve that complex
Absolutely.
problem.
Yep.
Yeah. And I love the talent development point from that standpoint, right? And the curiosity that you pointed out. Those are that curiosity piece is really important, because another thing about new leaders, or leaders in general, is the ego can get in the way. Yeah. And again, keeping it 100 here, I would be lying if I said my ego hasn't gotten in the way at times. So
Totally.
it's an important piece, in order so you can be in that room and learn those things in a curious mode, and deploy it to solve problems, either individual, within your one-on-one coaching, because your coaching is going to be bolstered. So if you are managing down, to be better at managing down if you are managing up and out.
Totally. Yep.
Very good. Well, you mentioned the teaming dynamic, transitioning once again. Talk about the teaming dynamic at ZoomInfo. I know you've moved from remote to a hybrid model within the sales development organization. And this seems to be a trend within large organizations. Still a lot of companies that I see that they're smaller, early stage, are still having a lot of remote SDR teams. So but they're probably toying with that idea, right? So what were you facing? What's been the impact since making that change? Or are you done with the change? Like, can you give us an update of how moving from remote to hybrid has changed your sales development organization?
Totally. I'll even back up a step from the remote piece. So prior to 2020, we had effectively zero remote work in the company. We were completely in office full time, 5 days a week, and that was every department. It wasn't just sales development. COVID rolls around, and so it wasn't necessarily a choice that the business made, like, we think this is the right thing to do. It was more like, this is what's happening in the world and we're going to react. And we found, hey, we were able to do pretty well being remote, but we kept a really close eye on some things that started coming up and some things we felt like were missing, and
Hmm.
some of the new and unique challenges around onboarding in a completely virtual environment,
Right.
to developing talent over time in a completely virtual environment. And so it's still very much in progress for us. We have gone back to, by and large, 1 day in the office, 2 days in the office, and we're keeping a close eye on the benefits that we're seeing from doing that. And some of those things really are unique to sales development, I think. So I'm
Interesting.
certainly not speaking for sales teams as a whole or other departments, but I think there are some things about sales development, and maybe this would apply to certain other departments and job functions as well. But generally speaking, we're
Yeah.
often dealing with a lot of people who are either in their first ever job, or they're new in their professional career, they're younger, and there is so much value in peer-to-peer contact, and so many things that when you're on a sales floor and there's people around you making calls, you just sort of pick up through osmosis as you're, typing an email to somebody maybe, but you hear somebody next to you that's on a call that says something that's a
Yeah.
great line.
It's so hard to measure the difference here. Like, yeah, that those little things, but happen, it's multiplied by number of people you have and the time that you
Absolutely.
spend together. And it's just an exponential advantage when you have people, I'm sorry, working together in an office. The office, I've said this in other interviews, is like the number one innovation tool, I should say, for organizations. If you want people to grow faster in their positions and in their own function, if you want everything to hum, I mean, yes, remote works. We proved that we can do it remote, but we can do it a lot better. It sounds like when we're together.
Totally. Yeah. The learning component, just as I look out over our sales floor now and see SDRs that are talking to one another, and some on calls, and just the collaboration that happens there, that can happen in a virtual environment, certainly. But if you think about what it takes to get a certain level of output around collaboration, there's an intentionality that has to be there when you're in a virtual setting. Like, you have to schedule it. It's very much planned ahead of time. And so oftentimes it will feel resource constrained in terms of there's only so many hours in the day, and we're going to spend 30 minutes or an hour on this Zoom call with everybody. Whereas here, it's like we're going to be here for 8 hours, and it's just going to happen here and there, and we don't have to necessarily carve out. And there's still value in having the team call reviews and things like that are scheduled and are very intentional. So not saying that it's just like throw caution to the wind at all, but
Right, 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 right.
it's in addition to, right? We have the scheduled call reviews and all that kind of stuff, but we also, even when we're not trying to do it, we just have all this learning and collaboration happening.
Micro
And
doses. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And as you said, that builds exponentially over time, and the more
Exactly.
people you have, the more perspectives you have. There's also a camaraderie aspect to all of this as well, right? Like, sales development is not an easy job. I don't think anybody out there, in their
Right.
right mind at least, would say like, yeah, sales development's super
I mean,
easy.
would you rather be in the trenches taking shots alone, or would you rather be in the trenches taking shots with your comrades around you? It's,
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah, like the getting hung up on, the getting cursed out, like
exactly.
that stuff sucks. It sucks when you're in the office, it sucks when you're at home by yourself. But
But
when
then
you
when you
have,
have something good happens too, because you always hear about people who duck into conference rooms and want to hide out when they're making calls, but then there's the opposite, when there's people on the floor making calls and they're dropping bars, they're bringing fire. You're on that call and everybody around them kind of stops in awe and like, wow, wait, are you hearing this?
yeah,
And then they celebrate these calls. And then what happens when you're at home in the office and that happens? I mean, unless someone's like real time recording your call and then sharing it on Slack and saying, go listen to this call, which is still after the fact. I mean, yeah, the camaraderie is just bolstered. Again, it's multiplied, it's exponential.
yeah, it's the mood lifter, it's the energizer. It gets people fired up to make that next call, and to, it's 3 o'clock, we're in that afternoon lull, right?
Right.
And somebody hears that, and it's like, it's
Just
first thing in the
rally.
morning again for me. Let's go. And you
Let's
just, when
go.
you're listening to like a chorus recording, or a recording of some sort, like, there's still value in that, but
Yeah,
you're not going to get that same mood booster and seeing everybody else around you, and there's just like the tide is rising and everybody's going up.
it's a vibe. It's a
Yeah,
vibe. So
100%.
what does the team say though? Like, because there's a lot of resistance, we know, when people are remote, to going hybrid, especially if like there's an organizational shift where people have, to move to appease this. But point being, after the fact, you've brought people in, at least on a partial hybrid basis. So are people now keeping it real with you and saying, wow, I'm enjoying this, I'm getting a lot of value of this, or they're still seeing a lot of resistance to it? Like what are the SDRs saying?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, as I just look out on the sales floor here and I see the energy and I see people smiling, and like I think that speaks for itself, in that people are happy to be back. And I have heard that feedback explicitly, especially when we first started coming back in, a couple of months ago. It was like I just didn't even register how great it was going to be to just see people again during the workday, and what that feels like. And sometimes that can be hard to describe, and there's definitely some intangibles around that, because it's a feeling. um but yeah, I have
Yeah,
also heard that feedback very explicitly from SDRs. Like, it's so much easier to stay productive. There's a level of accountability that's built into that too. Like, it's really easy when you're at home, right? And you don't have somebody that's looking over your shoulder, whether it's a manager or peers or whoever.
right,
It's easy to be a little less productive, and to slip into those periods where you're not getting a whole lot done, you're not growing, you're not pushing yourself to be better, you're not doing the basic things you need to be
right.
doing.
Well,
That
I
just
would add to that though. I think people hear that a lot of times, and they think, and I can say this is definitely a version of that, where people are kind of pulling off. The productivity is going down because they're not doing anything. Like they're um, taking naps, or sleeping in, they're walking the dogs. But I think it's more of the latter, of like doing too much. When we're working from home now, we're trying to take on so much more, right? We have the cable guy, the plumber coming in, we have the kids are at home now with us. Obviously, we're trying to juggle our appointments. Well, I'll just dip out real quick and go to a doctor's appointment. It's the added stuff that we take on working from home, that I feel like, as someone who works from home, that I have to try and manage, instead of trying to juggle so much because I'm at home. I need to actually focus and act as if I had just drove 45 minutes outside of my zone so yeah, you're right. The level of discipline it takes a certain person to do it effectively. And people who've been doing it for a long time, like myself, still struggle with it. So I can only imagine that even if people are not saying it, part of them is in that office saying, damn, I'm glad I'm here and I'm not alone, even if they're not filling out surveys and raising their hand and telling you. I bet that people feel like that.
Totally. I mean, you can see it. Like I said, it kind of speaks for itself. The body language, the verbal and nonverbal stuff. Like, you can see it. And I'm not so naive as to say there are not people out there who are more productive when they work from home. If there's any ADD, ADHD folks who are in the audience for this podcast, and I am one of you, by the way, that is something that I have to manage when I'm in the office much more than when I'm at home. I have to manage it when I'm at home too, but it's different stuff. So when I'm in the office, it's a lot more just like I get distracted by people walking by, my office all day long, or popping in to say hello. And there's
Facts. Yeah.
value in that. There's a social component, the team building component, so it's not entirely a negative thing, but
The deep
there are
work becomes more difficult. I agree with you.
totally,
Yeah. Mhm.
totally.
Especially if
So
it looks like I can barely see in the corner there that you have maybe a little open work environment too. So for those that are on the floor, the idea of parking 2 hours, let me do some deep research, some deep focus work, that yeah, that's definitely a challenging when you're out in the open, unless you're like put a sign up and say do not disturb, I guess.
yeah, I mean, we always tease certain people on the team, of course, who are just kind of notorious for, and you think back to grade school, you had the class clown and the chatterboxes, like that
Right.
exists
Yeah.
on your sales teams too,
That
except
wasn't me at
most of
all,
the
I
people
promise.
are that. So yeah, we always tease some people, like, we're gonna have to put a sign on your back, like, please don't talk to me. I don't focus well, or what have you. But we also do a good job of providing space for people to have the focus that they need, and encouraging them. Like, yes, we have an open space here, and we want you to be making calls at your desk, but also, like, if you need to go into a call room for an hour because you're just in the zone, like, that's okay too, if that's what you need to do.
Fair. Fair.
And so we try to understand how everyone works, and blend. Okay, we expect you to do a lot of this in public and to learn in public, so we're not going to have you making all your calls in private. That's not going to be a thing here. But there will be times where you can go into a room and just blitz for an hour if that's what you need to do. block out all the distractions.
I
And
love that balance that you put there. You know, that's not going to be the norm, but if you need to, pull an audible here or there, it's all good. We have the
there's a
blended
time and a
work
place.
environment where you can make that happen. Very
Absolutely.
good. Very good. Well, what else is working at ZoomInfo? We talked offline about a particular problem that you're trying to crack right now, and you're still working through the chalkboard of what that formula looks like, I think, but you're making progress. So for those that don't know what the hell I'm talking about, product specialized SDRs. So you have 4 quadrants of products that your organization focuses on. All your stuff falls into those 4 quadrants. And so SDRs are assigned to one of those quadrants. And this presents a whole new way of SDR go-to-market motion. And to understand what an organization at your caliber is doing with this is going to be very insightful, I would imagine. So what can you share? How much of the formula do you have figured out so far? What have you come across, and what's working well, what's not?
For sure. So in short, what do we know? We know that specialization works. We know that specialization drives results, and we know that specialization is that's the way we're going. It's very difficult to have somebody who can be it goes back to the old cliche phrase, the jack of all trades, master of none, right? So
Yeah.
specialization around, and this is possible for us because in a lot of cases we're selling different products to different personas. And historically, when we were selling direct dial phone numbers and org charts as Discover Org, we were talking to salespeople predominantly and a little bit of marketing. And then marketing started to become more of that mix. And as we started acquiring companies, now we're selling a talent platform. We're not selling that to salespeople typically. We're selling it to HR and talent teams. So specializing around the personas that we sell to and allowing people and enabling people to become experts in, as I was talking about earlier, who those people are, what are they measured on, what makes them tick, what are their challenges, what do they run into, what keeps them awake at night, what makes them look like a superhero in their company when they accomplish it. And so we're building teams that are specializing in products and personas, and those two things go hand in hand. So it's not just knowing the product quadrant that you are in better than anyone else.
Right. You would
It's
think
knowing
that's like the focus. It's like, well, I study this area. I know this product really well. I know these pain points really well. And that's kind of the advantage of going specialized, but there's more to it, it sounds like.
Absolutely. I mean, we take a consultative approach, which I hope the audience of this podcast will appreciate. And being a consultant is a lot more than knowing the product and knowing the solutions. It's knowing the full context. It's knowing why you're reaching out. It's knowing what things you might be able to solve and what things you absolutely are not going to be able to solve. It's building credibility. It's understanding what your persona responds to positively and negatively. And so there's a lot of creativity too that comes with that. And we're able to experiment with different things in different places with personas and market segments and things like that. But yeah, product
So is it working well?
specialization.
I mean, are you guys seeing, so what was the before and after? Like, when did this shift happen? And are you seeing lift from it?
Yeah, the shift really happened, I would say, mid to late 2021 and into 2022 is kind of when we really established that. It was
Okay.
2022 when we officially launched here's our sales operating system, marketing operating system, talent operating system, and operations operating system.
Okay.
And so we've had varying levels of specialization through that time, but I would say really in early 2022 is when we kind of fully launched that. And it's worked well. It's
So
driven really good
did you
results.
launch your SDRs at the same time though? That doesn't, you had the 4 quadrants from a go-to-market standpoint, from a product focus, but were your SDRs also aligned to that, or did that come later?
It was kind of in phased approaches. So it wasn't a full like, okay, we're launching these 4 operating systems, and now we're also launching 4 SDR teams. So that was done in iterations over time, and really still is evolving to this day. There's elements that we're thinking about in the part of the business that I work in with our install base. It's understanding the impact that SDRs can make on renewal rates and net retention as a whole. It's understanding how our upsell motions are structured and really deploying SDRs, not just in product specializations, but we're also starting to think about outcome specializations. So typically a companies think in a very linear fashion. SDRs are this top of funnel, front of funnel operator, however you want to
Right,
think about
right.
it.
Hmm.
And their job is to book meetings that turn into pipeline, that turn into revenue. And
Right.
that's still true. But we got to start to think about like what type of pipeline are we talking about? And as a company and an organization grows, particularly recurring revenue model companies,
Mm.
you have this install base that you are trying to retain and grow.
Which
So
is
we
another
think of
important
this.
pillar in efficient growth. Exactly. Okay.
So we
I'm
start to
following.
think about those things as connected, but as separate, instead of assuming that they're just always going to be tied together. And so we're seeing some goodness too, and just being able to strategize where we're deploying resources, where we're spending marketing dollars, where we're deploying SDRs, and where we're spending our calling and emailing activity and efforts around outcomes for the business as a whole. And again, understanding that the retention and the growth is connected.
Right.
There's a relationship there, but it's not always the same thing. And you can't always take that linear approach to just having SDRs that are focused entirely on one, or focused on both, when realistically they're not focused on either one, and not
Mm.
optimized for either one. So that it allows us to really optimize for the overall results that we want, but the individual components of that. And we're seeing a lot of success with that. It also presents a lot of interesting challenges, things like rules of engagement and swim
Right.
lanes, right?
Thank you.
Even
Yeah.
back to the 4 operating systems. Like, as a company, the perfect outcome for us is we sell every single product we have to every single company out there. Like, that's not reality though. And when you have teams internally that are competing with each other, at the same time they're competing with all of the competitor products and other companies that are out there that we're
Right. The
competing
real
against.
competitors. Yeah.
It's
So
like, okay, this is not productive. So there's been a lot of unique challenges that we've had to think through, and
mm.
where we're deploying, who gets the right of way.
Because you have
And
4 SDRs to each account effectively now. Is that right?
potentially, yeah, in,
Potentially.
in a lot of cases, yeah,
Oh,
there
yeah. If
could
there's a
be.
fit based on whatever. Yeah. Okay. So,
Totally.
mhm.
And then on top of that, right, think about the retention versus growth. We might even have somebody that's a retention focused SDR on that account and a growth focused SDR on that account. So we have to start thinking about a timing
Layers.
aspect of where
Mhm.
that customer is in the customer journey. And is this upsell territory, or is it retention territory? And so, yeah, there's a lot of different combinations of
Mm.
how that can look. And so, keeping a delightful customer experience in mind, obviously we don't want to absolutely bombard our customers with outreach from several different teams. It's not effective, it's frustrating, it's
Right.
confusing for the
Yeah, you're
customer. It's
crossing
like,
wires. That's what we always worry about, is that don't you know, Zach's already reaching out to me. What are you calling me for, Derek?
totally. And then it can lead to, over time as well, this feeling of like, every time I hear from ZoomInfo, like, it's
It's a
just the
different
hand is up,
person.
and it's a different person, and the hand's always out, and it's just like, so that's very much the world that I live in, is trying to find that balance between hitting very aggressive growth goals, and understanding that we are truly reaching out because we believe that we have value to share and we can help drive better outcomes.
In a consultative manner, like you said. Yep.
Absolutely. So, understanding that piece of it, but also balancing that against, we have to be realistic, and we have to understand that we're people talking to other people, and that, there are ways that we can go about things that will cause more harm than good.
Mhm.
And so really there's been a premium around figuring out that perfect mix of the number of touch points, the number of people that can be sort of working an account at a given time. And that varies some segment to segment too, right? That's going to look a little different in an SMB team than it will in an enterprise or strategic team,
Mhm.
that has several different business units that operate almost as independent companies. I won't say there's less risk in that area, but it's different, and it's spread out a little bit more. So
Sure.
generally, like, it's a little bit, we have a little bit more room to work there without crossing wires and without being concerned that we're going to start working against ourselves. As we move down market, it's you have to think about that a lot differently. So yeah, we've seen a lot of good results, and I think specialization is a good thing. You get people who can be a lot more consultative, rather than just like, okay, I know enough about each of our products to get by.
Right.
That's not really what we want. We want to We want to solve problems for our customers. We want to unlock opportunities for our customers. And that comes from a consultative approach. And that consultative approach requires that we build that credibility and that trust with our customers. And that comes from expertise in the domain and the space. So it's absolutely something we are continuing to iterate on and get better at. And it's a fun problem set to solve and to be in the middle of every day.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because it's a complicated problem. And so you mentioned earlier about thinking about sales development differently and what we measure not being so linear. So this is what we're up against, is if we want to think differently, we have to be thinking about how we can measure and manage these more complicated scenarios or situations, whatever you want to call it. So that's kind of where you're spending your time, it sounds like, is on one hand, you're refereeing these intersections between the 4 quadrants and these different layers of teams, because it's not just the product specialization, like you mentioned, it's also where they are in the buyer's journey, because you have specialized roles within your organization on that front too, like you represent that. So outside of the refereeing, how are you measuring in this? Is this, are you using that BI team? Are you using AI? I mean, how are you being able to factor in these other not so direct, tangible metrics?
No doubt. That's a huge part of understanding if this is successful or not. It's not about how I feel or how anybody else feels about it. We have to be really clear on what are we measuring, how are we measuring it, and how are we interpreting the results? Like, what does good look like? What is
data driven, right?
Absolutely. Data driven, everything we do. So if we can't measure it, doesn't mean a whole lot to us. Right. So there's an interesting set of challenges that come with that too, in thinking through new things to measure, right? We're not always just thinking about conversion rate of lead to demo to opportunity to revenue, your traditional funnels. We're starting to think a lot about productivity metrics and efficiency metrics. And that's a hot topic right now too, with the macro economy and doing
efficient growth,
less.
Exactly.
Understanding your unit economics is something that we talk a lot internally about in sales development. How much revenue are we generating per head? How much pipeline are we generating per head? And then starting to break that down across the different specializations, and even thinking about retention dollars per head versus upsell dollars per head. That's a great example of these are new things that we're starting to measure.
And this is what you mean by productivity metrics? Is that these are the components of that are some of the building blocks?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, and this goes back to managing up and managing out, right? These are not things, I'm not the BI wizard here, but we have great partnerships with other teams that are helping us measure these things and helping us establish the baselines and helping us interpret the data that we're seeing. And, you know, another area where I spend a lot of my time right now, which is both really fun and really frustrating at the same time, is, you know, what I see happening out on the sales floor and in the business as a director across an org of, you know, I'm responsible for about 120 SDRs. What I see and what I hear from the leaders that are responsible for those teams doesn't always line up with what I'm seeing in the data. And finding the balance between pushing back on that and saying, like, the data's wrong because I feel like it's wrong because of what I'm hearing.
Anecdotes,
and also just understanding, like, sometimes the data is right. Usually the data is right. And usually when we have the data that's wrong, it's that we've measured something incorrectly or we've defined something incorrectly. So living in that space,
an exception,
finding, you know, does this seem consistent with what I'm seeing and what feedback I'm hearing from the SDRs and from customers, and like, is all of that lining up in a narrative that makes sense? And if it's not, like, where's the broken link? And so I spend a lot of time in that space right now. And, you know, being data driven is not as easy and as simple as it sounds.
It sounds really good, right? But there's a lot of rolling up the sleeves.
It's messy.
That's involved. Yeah.
It's a dirty job. Exactly, if you think back to the old show with Micro, Dirty Jobs with Micro, I feel like being data driven in your decisions is very much a dirty job.
Well, dirty data don't help. But when you do have good data, data don't lie. Right.
That's right.
So good. This has been awesome, man. Thank you. I know we're at the bottom of the hour and you probably have meetings to get to. Where do you want to send people to connect with you, to learn more about ZoomInfo? I'm sure they can go to your website, but anything you would leave them with?
Yeah. Find me on LinkedIn. My email is first.last@zoominfo.com, Zachary.Thompson@zoominfo.com. Pretty easy to track down. Feel free to jump on our website. As I said before, on the ChatGPT integration, there's a video floating around on LinkedIn that Henry
We'll drop
Schuck,
it in
our
the show notes for
CEO,
sure. Yeah.
released.
Mhm.
So there's tons of resources out there, but feel free to reach out direct. I do love meeting with sales development leaders and sales development orgs, whether you are launching a team for the first time, whether you're scaling a team, whether you're in a position right now where you are facing a headcount cut and you're like, how are we going to do what we need to do with half of
More
the
with
heads that we
less.
had
Yeah.
before? I mean,
Yeah.
SDRs are not cheap. That sales development is not a cheap part of the business to operate. So happy to share thoughts and help build the community up as a whole. So Derek, always a pleasure. Love catching up and talking shop, like I said before, and um, looking forward to conversations that come out of the audience listening to this. And I mean, I still have people who interview with me who said, I listened to your 10 Bound podcast with Derek Williams, and
Nice.
uh, people who I've hired as a result of listening to the podcast. So always love these
Cool.
opportunities, and yeah, great to catch up.